The Psychology of Murder, The Traits We Share with Killers by Casey Lytle. Episode 2, The Case of JonBenet Ramsey. Okay, so why start this series with a case that's a quarter century old? It's been picked apart every which way. It's never been solved and very likely never will be solved unless there's a deathbed confession by someone that the police would agree solves and closes the case. I don't have any new revelations in here on who may have done it or why, but I picked this case because it includes a lot of elements that we're going to use later when we start picking apart evidence and looking at how we have a tendency to get tunnel vision when we've selected who we think did it. We have a tendency to engage in confirmation bias and only consider evidence that fits our theory, and we kind of just blow off, disregard evidence that doesn't fit it. In any case, you've got to explain the stuff that doesn't explain your theory. You can't just say, well, that part of it doesn't matter. There's a lot of it in this case. There are suspects all over the place here, from everyone in the Ramsey family to their friends they were with the night before, to neighbors. One neighbor who was kind of a part-time housekeeper, and other people in the community even had, over the years, a couple confessions that for some reason police disregarded and said that weren't part of the case. Now, this is another problem in all of these cases, the ones that go unsolved, in that the police have information we don't have. So our theories, whatever they are, whatever evidence we grab for these theories, is partially incomplete because we don't have all the evidence. When police say they disregard someone or don't consider someone a suspect, that's based on the information they have that we don't. So the assumption there, if we had the information they have, we would probably see why they said these people are not suspects. Now, the Ramsey family officially was cleared as suspects in 2008. Boulder Police Department said that more current DNA testing cleared all of the family. They apologized to the family. The mother, Patsy Ramsey, had passed away 2 years earlier from cancer, but John Ramsey, the father, and Burke Ramsey, the brother, are still around. A lot of people feel the brother did it. But again, that's kind of a case of confirmation bias, looking at that, and we'll look at those things. One of the things we're looking at here, what information do you have? Because when we start engaging in confirmation bias, we will not only focus too heavily on the information that supports our theories, we will either exaggerate or even in some cases make up evidence that doesn't exist simply to support our pet theory on it. And there's a lot of that in this case. We can take, in this case, two key elements of it that are available to the public and use that to likely eliminate a lot of suspect categories. And those two things are the ransom letter that was left behind and the suggested charges by the grand jury that was put together in 1999. The details of how the grand jury came about to their charges were never released. We never got to see what the grand jury saw, but we did get their two recommendations. That can give us some basis to say, what do they have that would cause them to make these kind of recommendations? Does our theory, whatever it is, fit into those recommendations? Would it make sense given those recommendations? Because the grand jury saw stuff we didn't get to see. So we always have to take that into account. Now, just as a primer here, I'm probably very familiar with the case, but just as kind of a introduction to it, we'll go just lightly over the case here. We're talking about a quarter century ago, more than that now. December 26th, 1996 is when she was found deceased. So let's back up a little bit on this. JonBenet, who had been in child pageants since she was 4, when shortly after, a couple years after her family had moved to Boulder, Colorado from Atlanta. Her last pageant had been December 17th, 1996, in Denver, where she had won Little Miss Christmas. Okay. On Christmas night, they were at a party at the home of their friends Fleet and Priscilla White. They came home from that, put the kids to bed. Everyone went to bed. The next morning, Patsy Ramsey finds a ransom note either on or near the stairs that go down to the basement. She calls the police, then calls the Whites, who arrive right around, either before or around the same time the police arrive. Police search the house initially, including the basement, find nothing. Initial report is that they did not check the wine cellar / storage room in the basement because they said it was locked. Fleet White said he went down later, did open that door, but couldn't find the light switch, so saw nothing in there. John Ramsey, the father, on suggestion later of a detective, did go down and search the basement again, and he reports finding JonBenet in that room, that storage room, wrapped in a blanket, hands tied up above her head, tape over her mouth. Rather than just alert people that he had found her, he tried to untie her. He removed the tape. He picked her up out of the room and carried her upstairs. Now, that immediately made police suspicious. A lot of things about this case are immediately suspicious. Why did this one grab public attention the way it did? Well, you have an upper-class family, child beauty pageant contestant, suspicious behavior by the parents, which we will specify here in a moment. A lot of different suspects, but no arrests. And as we're going to see, the ransom note itself makes no sense. Now, in any case of an abused, missing, or murdered child, the first people you have to eliminate as suspects are the people in the immediate environment. First of all, the parents, because statistically, more children are killed by their parents every year than by any other group. That's the first you have to eliminate. So the first thing that really throws a monkey wrench in a lot of this is the ransom note she found. Mr. Ramsey, addressed to Mr. Ramsey, not the Ramsey family in general. Listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. We do respect your business, but not the country that it serves. At this time, we have your daughter in our possession. She is safe and unharmed, and if you want her to see 1997, you must follow our instructions to the letter. You will withdraw $118,000 from your account. $100,000 will be in $100 bills and the remaining $18,000 in $20 bills. Make sure you bring an adequate sized attaché to the bank. When you get home, you will put the money in a brown paper bag. I will call you between 8 and 10 a.m. tomorrow morning to instruct you on delivery. The delivery will be exhausting, so I advise you to be rested. If we monitor you getting the money early, we might call you early to arrange an earlier delivery of the money. Now, right away, they're talking about 8 a.m. in the morning. He might go get it earlier. What bank is going to be open at that time that he could actually go and get that amount of money earlier? Any deviation of my instructions will result in the immediate execution of your daughter. You will also be denied her remains for proper burial. The two gentlemen watching over your daughter do not particularly like you, so I advise you not to provoke them. So we're creating an assumption of more than one person, the person writing the note and supposedly two other people that are watching her. Speaking to anyone about your situation, such as police, FBI, etc., will result in your daughter being beheaded. If we catch you talking to a stray dog, she dies. If you alert bank authorities, she dies. If the money is in any way marked or tampered with, she dies. You will be scanned for electronic devices, and if any are found, she dies. You can try to deceive us, but be warned that we are familiar with law enforcement countermeasures and tactics. You stand a 99% chance of killing your daughter if you try to outsmart us. Follow our instructions, and you stand a 100% chance of getting her back. You and your family are under constant scrutiny as well as the authorities. Don't try to grow a brain, John. You are not the only fat cat around, so don't think that killing will be difficult. Don't underestimate us, John. Use that good southern common sense of yours. It is up to you now, John. And it ends with victory, SBTC, which was never established what they mean by that. Now, right away, you can make some assumptions here. It was found right near the entrance to the basement. So, was it put there to stop the family from searching the house any further and finding the body in the basement, right? But it was discovered later that the note was written on stationery from in the house using a pen from in the house, and both the pen and stationery were put away after the letter was written. Further forensic analysis showed, looking at indents on that pad, that there had been other attempts earlier, like drafts of the letter before the one that was put by the stairs. Right away, if this were, let's just assume for a moment, this is a foreign faction of multiple people kidnapping a child for money, would it make any sense to leave the body in the house? If you had access, you would take, even if they had accidentally killed her in the house, you would still take the body with you to make the family think she was alive. Why would you leave it there in the house? And reading through the note, no doubt you get the same feeling a lot of people did, that this was written by someone whose idea of kidnapping comes from movies and TV. You've got the stereotypical foreign faction, the whole mentioning of beheading and ending with victory is a stereotype of Middle Eastern terrorists that you would see in movies at the time. So it makes absolutely no sense considering that the body was found in the house. Plus, if you did that, you would have that ransom note before you even showed up at the house. It would be a very quick snatch and grab. Get your target, leave the note, get out. You're not going to spend time in the house writing the note. So that right away, we can really throw out the idea that there really was any sort of foreign faction involved. Obviously, has been mentioned, the specific amount they mentioned turns out to be similar to a bonus John Ramsey had received just recently prior to that. So there's specific knowledge of that. Was the note meant to point suspicion at someone that John Ramsey worked with, therefore having that knowledge of it? Possibility. But when we look at the handwriting itself on the note, there are indicators that whoever wrote it was consciously trying to change their handwriting style. You see letter styles that change kind of from beginning to end. The note at the very beginning starts out kind of shaky, which can be from anxiety and from someone writing slower than they normally write, trying to intentionally change their writing style. But as you get near the end of the note, the writing becomes smoother, and that's where you see that some of the less common letters start to change their style, which tells us the person was starting to write faster near the end, and they were writing some letter styles that were not motor memory for them. It was not their common writing style. Why would you change your writing style intentionally on a note that you're writing there in the house unless you suspected you could be asked to give a writing sample to authorities, therefore assuming you may be a suspect in the case? A true foreign faction probably isn't someone that would be worried at all about being considered a suspect. And why wouldn't you have it typed out in advance instead of handwriting? So that brings up the question, is it written by someone in the family trying to direct tension away from the family? Is it written by someone near the family trying to point kind of suspicion at the family, knowing it would look suspicious? Now, this brings us about, we want to hit this before we go further here, because again, the ransom note makes no sense. In fact, we can quite generally throw out the idea or make it a very low probability possibility of this being a true stranger that had been stalking the family and just happened to opportunistically have a chance to grab her or assault her. They would not spend the time in the house to write a note like this and leave the body in the house. So we can kind of eliminate that. We're into the realm here of someone more familiar with the family and with our JonBenet. But let's go now. I mentioned the grand jury suggested charges that were put forth in 1999, released to the public some years later. The prosecutor at the time chose not to follow these because he said he didn't feel there was enough evidence for prosecution. Not that these were wrong, just that based on the evidence, he didn't feel confident of being able to get a conviction. So the two suggested charges, Patricia Ramsey and husband John Ramsey, did permit a child to be unreasonably placed in a situation which posed a threat of injury to the child's life or health, which resulted in the death of JonBenet Ramsey. So that one, whatever theory you have of who may have done it, does that one fit? Like what would the parents have done that unreasonably placed her in a situation which posed a threat of injury or death? When people look at the brother as a suspect, why would you suggest charges like this if the brother was considered a threat? Are you expecting that the brother should have been locked in a room or tied to a bed to prevent injury? What is it here that they did to allow access that was considered unreasonable? The other charge says that each parent did render assistance to a person with intent to hinder, delay, and prevent the discovery, detention, apprehension, prosecution, conviction, and punishment of such person for the commission of a crime. Knowing the person being assisted has committed and was suspected of the crime of murder in the first degree and child abuse resulting in death. Now, would a lot of people pointed that when they suspect the brother, that they were helping cover up the brother. Again, the brother angle doesn't fit the first charge, but someone known to the family would. So what we can say from the grand jury, along with what we just said from the ransom note, we're eliminating a stranger from this. This seems to suggest it was someone the Ramseys knew, and for whatever reason, they helped prevent that person from being discovered and charged with the crime. So this also suggests the Ramseys themselves did not do it, but they know who the killer is, and they helped cover for the killer. So why are the parents suspects through this? Well, obviously the ransom note came from within the house. The writer spent an unusual amount of time in the house writing the letter and apparently practicing the letter. The notepad and pen were put away. The handwriting analysis eliminated John Ramsey, but did not eliminate Patsy. Now, some people say it's obvious feminine style handwriting. There are cases in which gender-based handwriting styles are not 100%. Quite often you can detect gender handwriting anywhere from 60 to 80% of the time, but it's not 100% consistent. And in this case, if you're writing the letter more slowly, intentionally trying to change your handwriting style, that could result in producing a style that may appear a feminine style when it's not. So we can't completely eliminate the possibility of a male writing the note. Uh, the note threatens JonBenet's life if police were contacted, but Patsy immediately called the police. A frantic parent might not, or at least might not call the police to the house, might go to the police station. Plus, they were supposed to call within 8 and 10 that morning. Patsy found the note around 5:30 in the morning. Ramsey's very quickly got a lawyer, were not immediately cooperative with police. Uh, John Ramsey that afternoon had contacted their pilot to arrange to take the rest of the family back to Atlanta. So, and John Ramsey himself disturbed the scene. So when we say JonBenet was found in that storage room slash wine cellar, the only evidence we have of that is the claim of John Ramsey. We actually don't know for sure that that's where he found her. We're just uh, assuming that the place and the condition that he claims she was in, or the position she was in, is what it was. He could have pulled her in from anywhere down there and just claimed it was that room. He obviously disturbed the scene. There could have been other evidence in that room that he got rid of before bringing the body up. There is a buffet of potential there simply because he disturbed the scene before police were able to look at the scene. The family claimed they were too emotional to talk to police in the days after the murder, but gave an interview to CNN on New Year's Day, right after JonBenet's funeral in Georgia, in which they were thanking their supporters through this. That seems something a little odd, less than a week after your daughter has perished, when you're not quite being cooperative with police. Their story also changed about what occurred when they came home from the Whites that evening. Initially, they said John put the kids to bed and read stories to them. And then later on, the story was changed to JonBenet was zonked out when they got home and was taken directly to bed. Undigested pineapple and an open can of pineapple in the kitchen seems to support that first story, that she may have snacked before going to bed. Also, the possibility she came down later and snacked on pineapple before she was murdered. Police were unable to eliminate the parents as suspects. Again, later on, DNA found on the body was used to eliminate a lot of suspects, and it did not match anyone in the family. Now, there is another possibility when we bring in DNA as the sole thing that police have used to eliminate suspects. There is a possibility the DNA found on her was not from the killer, that there's a possibility she may have been sexually assaulted by someone else or molested by someone else prior to being killed, and it was someone else who killed her. So that's another kind of thing we have to keep in mind in here. Now, because this has got more media attention in the last couple of years, let's hit people suspecting the brother. The neighbor, who was kind of a housekeeper there, had reported the brother had behavioral problems, mentioning things like him smearing feces on the walls. JonBenet herself had a tendency for bedwetting, which can just be a developmental phase, but can also be the sign of an abusive environment. They say he was jealous of the attention his sister was getting. Now, she was 6 years old at the time. He was 9 years old at the time. They also analyze his behavior in the police interviews and find it kind of odd. But one of the things we have to look at when analyzing his behavior, if you look up those videos, it was almost a year after the killing before those interviews were done, the ones you see the videos of. He is not going to show the same kind of behavior a year later that he would have shown in just the weeks afterward. So parents did not give police access to him immediately afterward. When people analyze Patsy's 911 call, they think they hear his voice in the background at the end of the call. This is another one we got to be careful about because there's an assumption that when Patsy was done with the call that her phone did not disconnect. And so kind of the garbled sounds you're hearing on there are supposedly from in the kitchen. Now let's listen to that call.
How old is your daughter?
6 years old. She's blonde. 6 years old.
How long ago was it?
I don't know. I just found the note. And my daughter's...
Does it say who took her?
What?
Does it say who took her?
I don't know. There's a ransom note here.
It's a ransom note?
It says SBTC. Victory. Please.
Okay, what's your name? Are you
Patsy Ramsey. I'm the mother. Oh my God. Please.
I'm sending an officer over, okay?
Please.
Do you know how long she's been gone?
No, I don't. Please, we just got out and she's right here. Oh my God, please.
Okay,
Please, there's somebody.
I am, honey.
Please.
Take a deep breath in
Please,
here, okay?
hurry.
Patsy.
Now let's listen again to that kind of garbled part at the end, right after the 911 operators saying, Patsy.
Patsy.
This is the part that people think they hear Patsy saying things. They think they hear the brother's voice in there when he was supposedly still in bed. The problem with this is when you have garbled sound like that, you can hear almost anything in it. It is very likely her phone did disconnect, and what you're hearing is just interference on the line. There is also possibility some of what you hear may be from the 911 operator's side of the conversation, peripheral, just environmental noise from that side. So we can't really put a lot of weight in that. The other one are the injuries, signs of sexual assault, skull fracture. These things not impossible for a 9-year-old, but really, really improbable for a 9-year-old. It also kind of makes no sense that the parents would choose to create such an elaborate alternate plan of this kidnapping / murder if the son accidentally killed his sister. You could very easily just stage it to look like an accidental fall down those stairs to the basement and just clear it from that without taking the chance of some very elaborate hoax to try to cover it up. The grand jury charges, when you look at as we mentioned, the unreasonable situation, doesn't really fit what you would say for a child being in the house, a child that is living in the house. And again, the garbled 911 call. We can't really jump into that too much. So what are our probabilities so far, given the evidence we have of suspects? A stranger, really low probability of that. I mean, you would have the possibility that JonBenet got up late, got herself some pineapple, and a lurking stranger happened to see her and broke into the house. But why write a ransom note? Why spend that time in there? Why the specific ransom amount if you were just a lurking stranger? Police did not find any footprints in the snow around the house that would indicate a stranger coming and going. And the grand jury charges, the second charges, of course, implicate the Ramseys as knowing the person who did it. So let's go to the parents. Patsy Ramsey was an immediate suspect here. Now, Patsy Ramsey herself had been a beauty queen. I believe at the age of 20, she won Miss West Virginia. A couple years later, her sister won the same title. She had started putting JonBenet in these child pageants when JonBenet was 4, 2 years before the murder, which, of course, with her history, puts her, high probability of being the stereotype of a pageant mom and all the negative stereotypes that come with that. And within psychology, we would also put a high probability of here what we call achievement by proxy, which is essentially living vicariously through the achievement of your child. We can see this sometimes with overachieving parents who push their children too hard. It's not that you're pushing the child for their success or having pride in their success. It's that you are experiencing that success for yourself, and the child has just become a conduit of it. And that's where things can get dark and ugly. JonBenet's bedwetting would be an indicator of a kind of a tough environment like that. One of the theories people suggest as a scenario, and again, I'm just throwing this as an example, is that JonBenet woke Patsy during the night because she had had a bedwetting episode and needed her clothes and her bed changed. Patsy was angry about it, sent her downstairs to get cleaned up while she stripped off the bed and changed the sheets and the blankets. She came down, and instead of finding JonBenet getting cleaned up, she found her sitting in the kitchen eating pineapple. This angered her. She shoved the wet sheets at her, told her to go down and put the sheets in the washer. The laundry room was in the basement. Accidentally shoved her onto those stairs, in which she fell down the stairs and got the skull fracture and abrasions that the autopsy report showed. Thinking she had killed her, she initially staged what looked like an assault, putting the line around her neck, looking as if she'd been strangled, and without knowing, actually caused her death from that. And then possibly in a panic, shoved the body into the storage room, realized she needed to buy some time to get rid of the body later, so she came up and wrote the ransom note so that the rest of the family wouldn't search the house when it came up. She obviously showed no fear that any kidnapper was going to harm her, because she knew there was no real kidnapper. And again, the entire note is just a stereotype of a movie and TV style kidnapping. Why would we say maybe not the mom in this case? Well, if the note was placed where she says it was, the ransom note seemed to be placed to stop her from further searching the house. She gets up, and this scenario would be she got up because they had plans to be traveling on a holiday vacation later that day, which is another reason that John Ramsey would have called the pilot to change those plans later. She would have found JonBenet not in her room. She would have started searching, become concerned, and before searching the basement, she would have found the ransom letter and then alerted her husband. So it may have seemed to be placed there to stop her from searching. And again, staging an elaborate plan like that, including indicators of sexual assault, bondage, is less likely than just staging an accidental fall down the stairs. That would be much easier, less complex. Would a parent stage the body of their deceased child to look like potential sexual assault and murder, especially right after it had happened? The grand jury, if we go back to the grand jury suggested charges, again, they don't suggest that one of the parents did it. So what about John Ramsey? Why is he suspected? Well, right off the bat, we mentioned it before, he's the only one that saw the body in that room in the state it was in. So all those claims come from him. He immediately disturbed the crime scene, trying to untie her, removing the tape from her mouth, and taking her from the scene and carrying her upstairs rather than calling someone down there. Both he and Fleet White, the friend they had been with the previous evening, had supposedly checked the room. So it guaranteed any evidence of their presence in the room would be assumed during the search. Two suspicions: he was abusing or molesting her and went too far with it. The DNA results, though, cleared him. The DNA on the body was not him. Or this is kind of a darker angle that was kind of brought up in the Boulder area in the months and years after this, because those child pageants, and although the people who participate hate this, there is a kind of a creepy air about them, taking children that young, dressing them up putting on makeup to look adult-like. There's this kind of creepy, borderline pedophile vibe to it, which causes a lot of suspicion and accusation of things like child sex trafficking, abuse trafficking, this kind of thing going on. And there were accusations of that, again, in the weeks, months, and years in Boulder after this, that they felt there was a child sex ring in Boulder and the family was somehow connected to that, which was never established or proven. But one of the theories is that he was making her available to people in that network. Someone else had molested her. The death was accidental, and he helped cover it up because of his own involvement in it. So even though they didn't do it, revealing the killer would reveal their involvement in something that would get them in trouble. And again, JonBenet's bedwetting is often noted as a sign of a history of being abused or molested. If the parents did not kill her but helped cover up the murder and protect the guilty person, who are the likely suspects that would fit the grand jury charges? Well, it needs to be someone the Ramseys knew. A lot of public suspicion went immediately to the friends they had spent Christmas evening with, Fleet and Priscilla White. Wasn't it very convenient that after a late night there, that the Whites just happened? I mean, if you called 911 and alerted the police and then called the Whites, you would assume they would be asleep, right? They must have just sprung right into action to arrive there about the same time the police did. So isn't that suspicious? It's pretty quick arrival. Some even suspect the Whites actually did not go home, that the Whites came to the Ramsey's house with them that evening, and there was possibly molestation, accidental abuse, and a staging of this to cover. A lot of suspicions focused on Fleet White, and in fact, there was kind of a fallout between the Whites and the Ramseys after this, kind of a lot of throwing back and forth of accusations, which you wouldn't expect if they were all actually innocent and knew of their innocence. There was accusations Fleet White was involved in a sex trafficking operation connected to these child pageants, that he possibly molested her at the Christmas party, and that's why the DNA was on there, or made her accessible to someone else at the party. In general, a lot of these suspicions come around to the idea that a high-profile person in the community was at Fleet and Priscilla White's party and had molested JonBenet prior to the death, and therefore both John and Patsy are going to cover for the person. Now, there's a lot of variations here. One, that Patsy Ramsey was not immediately aware of this, but John and Fleet were, and that's why the note, which may have been written by Priscilla White, was placed near the basement to stop her from going down there. Alternative in the molestation theory is that the molester actually came to the house that evening, and the molestation happened in that room in the basement. And perhaps she started fighting back or resisting or screaming, and that's when she was struck on the head, which was feared to be fatal, or the person didn't know it was fatal, and the ligament was placed around the neck afterward, and the person was not aware that it was placed so tight that it ended her life until it became apparent. No tracks in the snow around the house could suggest then that the abuser exited just through the driveway, and that evidence would have been disturbed by supposedly the Whites coming back over, by the police arriving on the scene. So a lot of different alternatives thrown in there. Again, I believe DNA testing cleared the Whites also, which would throw in the idea of a high-profile person within the community, possibly someone associated with the pageants, who was the person who did it, and therefore someone who was never tested or checked as a suspect. So in a nutshell, whoever it was, there was likely sexual assault by someone that the Ramseys knew, that they gave access to JonBenet. They're the ones that left the DNA, but because they were never brought up by the Ramseys or the Whites as a possible suspect, they were never checked as far as a DNA sample. Could be Jean or Patsy accidentally killed her in an attempt to keep her from crying out or out of anger. But again, the grand jury recommendations don't suggest that either of the parents were involved. And again, because the DNA found on the body would therefore not be anyone in the house, they knew they would be cleared. John Ramsey today is even calling for better DNA analysis, obviously confident it would not point to him or anyone in the family. Whoever the DNA belonged to was never a suspect, never anyone that was brought up, but the grand jury seemed to think that the Ramseys knew who that was. So really, if we're going to look for someone outside who's already been looked at here, we would probably look at people associated with the pageants, possibly even that last pageant JonBenet was in on the 17th. Who did anyone ever do DNA testing or take DNA samples of the judges in that pageant or any administrators who ran that? Which is why we say earlier this case will probably never be solved unless there's a deathbed confession by someone. But the key point here is we look at the ransom letter and how it makes no sense. It totally seems to blow off the idea of a stranger, any of these people who later confessed to it or that people thought did it. Grand jury recommendations tell us the Ramseys knew who the person was and actively engaged in assistance to them to cover it up so they wouldn't be discovered. Why would they do that? To cover up the person who killed their daughter? Because revealing that person would also reveal something they were doing that was illegal, possibly just as bad. When we go forward looking at other cases like this, we always have to say, from what we know, what kind of suspect areas can we eliminate? Where can we focus it here? So if we look at all these things, we're not looking at anyone in the Ramsey family as the person who did it. We're not looking at a stranger. We're looking at people in orbit around the family that had access to the family. And given DNA evidence, we're looking for someone who wasn't considered a suspect and was never tested. Someone that the Ramseys themselves would probably avoid listing as a suspect. Fleet and Priscilla White, given the back and forth between them later on, people who used to be friends kind of became very antagonistic toward each other, probably was not the Whites either. Probably someone that gained access through them. Again, we're always going to look at what evidence is available to us, and we're always going to keep in mind what evidence do the police have that we don't have. So when the police say someone is not a suspect, what is it they know that causes them to write this person off when those of us without the information, still suspect? So that's kind of the direction we'll take going forward from here. So this was kind of a long one, kind of dragged that on. Sorry to drag you through a quarter-century-old case. JonBenet would be in her early 30s today. But that pretty much sets a good foundation of the ways in which we're going to pick apart other cases as we go through. So if that hasn't bored you enough, let's see where we're going to go in episode 3.